It's July 1st, 2022, and we're recording in Seattle, Washington. I'm Judith Y., Archives Chair for District 40. My home group is Saturday Promises. Let's start off with introductions. Bev, can you introduce yourself, give your home group, and your sobriety date?
My name is Beverly, and my sobriety date is February 1st, 1981, and I guess Saturday Promises would be my home group.
Well, thanks so much for doing this interview with us. And so, could you give me a little bit of background about your experience with, getting sober, how you came to get sober, where you got sober?
Sure. Um, oh, let's see. It was a long time ago, many lifetimes ago. I was living in Los Angeles. I grew up in Los Angeles. I grew up in the suburbs in a small town called Altadena, California, near Pasadena. And I have, I'm the youngest of six. And I just grew up. I grew up in the late 50s, early 60s. And life was pretty magical. It was pretty fun. I don't have alcoholic parents. I had an alcoholic grandfather that I only met once. Um, but all of us liked to drink as kids. I mean, as teenagers. And I had my brother that was the closest to my age wound up doing a lot of drugs, mostly drugs in an early age, like starting 15, and he struggled through drug problems up until he died, which he died at 27, and struggled with it. And I I was a little afraid to do drugs. I mean, I kind of dabbled in the marijuana as a teenager, but I did like to drink. It was really fun, and especially if it was sweet, that kind of stuff. And it's kind of what we did. We smoked cigarettes and drank on the weekends at parties. We were always able to find things and somebody to buy something for us, or some of us would steal 6 packs of beer from thrifty drugstore. Not myself, but I would partake of it. We used to hang out at this youth center. It was at my junior high school, and they let us smoke cigarettes there because they wanted to have teenagers come. So we had a tree in the back of the gymnasium. It was this old oak tree, and we put these benches around it, and we called it the cancer tree because it was totally probably against the rules, but we could sit out there and smoke, and then we would just stay there. The center would open from 10 in the morning till 10 at night, and basically in the summertime, that's where I was. My mother said, I'm going to have your mail sent there, although I didn't really get mail back in those days, but she knew where I was going to be. But we were doing a lot of things. We had fun, but we were hanging out. This was probably 1967, 68, 69, and there was a lot going on in the world and in Los Angeles, and we were just a few years away from major riots in Watts. We were very close to that, and so there was a lot of tension. Martin Luther King had died, had been killed, and I lived in a very integrated, went to integrated schools, and so there was a lot of influence and a lot of culture and exposure to a lot of things. And we would hang out, and we would find there was one guy named Gamboa who was 21, and we'd put all our pennies together, and he would go down and buy a gallon of Red Mountain wine for us. Teenagers. I mean, all the stuff that people would be arrested for now. And he'd bring it back, and we'd go out different part of the school, and we'd pass around this big gallon of wine and get drunk and go home. And my parents didn't really know because we didn't really we tried to stay away from them, I guess. But so I was drinking at a very early age. I would say socially, I didn't drink every day. I didn't, didn't get the drug bug or the alcoholic bug from the very moment. All I knew is that I really enjoyed it. And it was fun, and it made me feel like an adult. And also, there were adults in my life, probably 15 years older than myself, that they didn't disapprove. They didn't try to stop anything. And one in particular was the recreational leader. There was a husband and wife team, and they were the perfect Americana, young, cool. They were probably in their 30s, and they had three beautiful blonde children, and I wound up being one of their babysitters. And, come to find out they had a really horrible relationship. He was abusive and actually beat her up. And I found out all this when I was 14, and I was devastated by it because they were kind of the parents that I wanted to have. And I remember I had to go to a movie and just sit in a movie and cry because I was so upset that illusion was gone. And that was just because I heard that they were breaking up. Then I kind of I went down to the woman's house because they lived close to me, and he was out of the house. He was having an affair with another teacher at my school. So, I was 13, 14 years old and, knew all this stuff. But I remember when I went down to her house, and she told me what had happened. I told her that I knew what had happened because it hadn't come out. And she offered me a beer at 14 or 15. She had one of those little taps, those little keggers, that you have about this big. And I went, So I was really upset. And then she offered me this beer, and I went, oh, cool. Oh, okay. I'll have it. I used to go down to her house and babysit her kids, and I became her confidant at about 15. And she was at least 32, 33. And she had these three little kids and a big dog. And she allowed me to drink with her. And so my mother and father thought I was down there babysitting, which I was. We weren't getting drunk or anything, but we were drinking. And I got entangled in her life. And so I would go to school and I would see her husband, her husband who was having an affair with another teacher that no one was supposed to know about. And I'd walk past her class, and then I would see him, but I was faithful to the wife. And I was like, had all this energy, and it was so inappropriate for me to be in it. It's just crazy. One time I was babysitting and she was out on a date, and the husband was creeping around the outside of the house. I thought it was a burglar, and I caught him, and I was afraid at first, but then when I saw it was him, I knew he wasn't going to hurt me or anything. He goes, oh, you caught me. I was just wanted to find out if Judy was interested in this guy because, I'm trying to get back together. So he really pulled me in. So when she came home, he was hiding outside. He made me promise not to tell her. He kind of sucked me in, and so I said, okay, well, I gotta go. And she was telling me about her date, and I left. And when I went back the next day, she had a black eye. So he beat her up after I left. And I was so angry and so mad. And so I was entrenched in this thing. And so I know it's probably more information that we need, but that's what set in for me, was getting enmeshed into people's lives that I shouldn't have been. There wasn't an adult around to go, yeah, probably not. You should probably go be a kid somewhere. And but it was all about drinking. and being accepted as a confident. It's like, oh, I'm like a friend of theirs. And it wasn't just those two people. I mean, there was two other teachers that I would go down to where the teachers were hanging out. It's like a bar, and would drink with them at 15, 15 years old. And it's
When you
and then
think about it now, it's like, oh, what were they
they're
thinking?
going to jail.
Yeah.
And then when I was in high school, I became friends with another woman who was 15 years older than me. And I used to go to her house, babysit her kids, and she was a divorcee, and she was into music with people, and we would smoke dope and drink, and we could just stay in her house and hang out, and we're still friends today, and she's sober too. So, I mean, it's just wild how these um, things happened. Anyway, so that's how I used to drink, mostly in places that were safe because I didn't really want to. I was more of a controlled drinker. I liked to drink a lot, but I didn't want to uh, kind of lose myself. I
Mhm.
didn't want to do psychedelics. I was afraid. I remember what they said about LSD, you'd lose your mind, and I was a little afraid about it. And sometimes when I would smoke pot and drink, I would just get so out there that I just didn't like it because I lost control. I felt like I could control my drinking. Um, I could for quite a long time, but then I couldn't, and so
So how did
yeah.
it come to not being able to discover that you
Well,
couldn't drink it?
so I had relationships, I did all this stuff. I came out gay, and that was difficult because I had been in a fundamentalist Christianity. I was in some rock and roll bands that were Christian based, and we would go and sing in prisons and all these things. And so here I was, this lesbian, alcoholic Christian. At 21, I came out, and I was like, I don't know what to do, because they're saying God is going to be mad at me. I mean, I had one woman who was just I really respected, and she said she was afraid that God was going to kill me.
Huh.
And I was like, okay, great. Well, I think I'll just go drink. And so I had about a three year period of where I left any any kind of church and any of that, and I said there is no God. I just like forget it. And oh no, I actually said, God, I'm going to put you on the shelf for now. I'm just going to go because I had this experience when I was about 16, 17 with a very powerful spiritual experience out of like a faith healer. And I had a direct experience, which I was not intending to have. And I asked in that when I felt like I had this direct contact. And I didn't really know I was gay. I said, well, what about this thing? And I heard this voice. I'm not kidding you. It was clear as day. It said, I made you that way for a reason. And I went, okay, well, and I didn't really think about it till later. So I said, okay, God, I'm just going to put you on the side. I'm just going to go do this gay thing. And so I was going to discotheques and partying and doing stuff out in Los Angeles. And things just sort of came to a point, the end of 1980, where I couldn't really tell you how I was going to act when I drank anymore. I had the intention of, oh, I'm not going to drink. Oh, maybe I'll have a beer. And it's that old thing of once you take a drink, the drink takes you. I crossed over a line, and I was working at FedEx in the early days, and we used to drink while we were working and do cocaine and all these things, in the back of the truck in Beverly Hills, snorting cocaine and having these 3-hour lunches. And I mean, all that stuff, they can't do any of that now, but back in the day, it was really fun because we were building this company and we were just young and dumb and driving these packages around, and cocaine helped that. And so we, so I could tell that it was not working for me. It was getting in the way of things. And so I was seeing a therapist at the time. I had broken up with this woman, and I continued to see the therapist, and the therapist finally said, I've consulted with some other people, and I think you're an alcoholic. And I went, what? She says, and I can't see you anymore because I don't have the expertise for that. You need to go someplace where you can get some education on it and some recovery. And I was really kind of miffed. And but she wouldn't see me anymore. And she suggested this place in Los Angeles, which is called the Alcoholism Center for Women. And it was two old, really big old houses side by side, and there was a parking lot in between, or a parking space. And I mean, they were probably built in the early 1900s, and they were for gay women. And one house was a residential place, and the other house was where they had groups and everything. So they had a in participant program and an out participant. Well, I had a job, I had a car, I had had an apartment. I wasn't living on the streets. I'm not going to go live at some place like that. And they didn't have the treatment centers that they have now. I mean, they probably did, but it would have been crazy. So I became an out participant. She suggested I go there. So I went there and I had this intake with this woman, and the woman was asking me all the typical questions about it. I'm like, I didn't know anything. Like, yeah, I drank. Yeah, that's, yeah. But I didn't think I was as bad as all those other girls on the other side. So I got into they assigned me a group, and they said part of it was I was going to have to go to AA. I went to AA one time with a friend of mine when I was 18. She was doing a paper for UCLA on Alcoholics Anonymous, and I went with her. Funny, why would she ask me? But it was exactly what I thought it would be. It was full of old men in raincoats, and it was probably down in Skid Row or something. And I was like, oh God, I'm not going to AA. But they had AA meetings along with this program in the house. So there was a separate recovery program where you got education of about to learn about what alcoholism is, where you are on the scale of it, what recovery is like, all the different kind of steps. And you had to go to Alcoholics Anonymous to understand that was part of the program. But they were definitely separate. They didn't base their program only on the 12 steps, but it was all incorporated. We learned about passive aggressiveness, things like that sort of simple stuff, that how to learn to say no to people and be assertive. And I learned a lot. I really did. I learned a lot from that. And within the first 2 weeks I was there, my brother, who I talked about, committed suicide when I was 2 weeks sober. And he had been a heroin addict, and he had tried to get sober. He was sober at a Narcotics Anonymous place for a while, and then he left that, and then he started using again. And he was with a really lovely woman, and it was really awful because he killed himself in front of his fiance. And anyway, so I was 2 weeks sober, and I had to deal with my brother's suicide. Now, he had tried to commit suicide before, so it wasn't a complete shock, but it's still a shock. And so I just stayed sober because I was afraid at that point. It became very serious to me at that point. So that happened, went through that, and I was in this program, like I say, in the Alcoholism Center for Women, going to AA on the side, and the meetings were the gay meetings, basically at their house at the center. And so I was sober for maybe a month, 2 months, and I had not gone out, but I went back east to visit some friends. And when I came back, friends of mine met me at the airport, and my first girlfriend as a lesbian had been killed while I was gone on a motorcycle accident. So it was like, great. So that added into it. And then when I was about a week later, I was at ACW, Alcoholism Center for Women, and in our group, we had a group meeting maybe twice a week, maybe I don't remember. And one of the girls who was in the group she came in late, and when you came in late, the counselor would say, "Okay, why are you late?" Just to stop. And the woman went, "Fuck this," and she left. And she went out and she hung herself in the back of the center where we were while we were having the meeting. So when we finished our meeting, all these people were like freaking out, and I'm like, "What's with the drama? Everything's drama around here." And they said Drew hung herself, and we're like, "Oh fuck!" So we went around in the back, and she had hung herself, and the paramedics were on the way, and so I was there when they cut her down, and they put a light, and I was holding the light, and so saw her, and I went, "Oh, she's fucking dead," because she was dead. And the paramedics came, and they said, "Well, what do you want us to do?" And I said, "Well, at least try something. I don't know, see if she's." And they said, "Well, no." They checked her heartbeat, and she was dead. And so, in the first 6 months of my sobriety, I had those three major things happen. Now, I was not that close with the woman who died, but it was a very impactful. It was like, okay, my brother, who I loved and adored, died, and then my first partner died, and she probably may have been a little drunk. Who knows? I don't know. But, she hit a car and, didn't have a helmet on, and that was it. And then here's this woman. So it was like I could see what my life was going to be, could possibly be. And so that was it. I just put myself into the program. I started going to AA. And I didn't know
what year was that? What year was that?
1981. Yeah. So in Los Angeles, they had little booklets of meetings. So I started venturing out to other meetings, and back then they didn't have gay meetings in the book because it was an outside issue back then. Mm-hmm. They considered it an outside issue, and so there was a lot of controversy going on in the larger AA community, whether to just put a G or a WG, women's gay meeting, or lesbian or whatever. So it was a big deal of trying to get that in there. And so the gay people in Los Angeles wanted to stay in AA, and they wanted to adhere to the traditions, but they couldn't because of the what the general service people were saying in Los Angeles. I don't know if it was a New York thing or whatever. So they started this own group called Alcoholics Together, which was just for homosexual alcoholics. That's what they would call it. Mm-hmm. And so there was a place on Sunset Boulevard called the AT Center, the Alcoholics Together Center. And so I started going there, and I thought my life was over because, these were it was sad. It was just sad. They were having a dance, and they put a record on, and it was like, oh my God, what have I come to? I'm 25 years old, I'm gorgeous, I'm beautiful, and these crazy people, and anyway, then all of those people started dying. I thought, okay, I don't know. So, we used to have to say, "Hi, my name is Beverly. I'm a alcoholic and a homosexual." And I went, "No, I'm not going to do that. That's not." And so it changed right around the time I got sober. Uh-huh. I remember a few of the early meetings where people would say that. So then the general service or central office in LA, they changed it. It was accepted. They went through whatever the procedures were, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, to get anything to change. It probably took years, but I was right at that point. They changed, and they were able to put the little G in the book where meetings were. And but the AT Center, which I think it's probably still there, they just call it the AT Center, and they had their own convention, and we did fabulous shows with drag queens. Would do the 12 steps as drag queens. Great. We had a lot of fun, but it was a part of Alcoholics Anonymous at that point. It was no longer a separate thing, but they just called it AT. So that's how I got involved. And actually, that's probably what kept me there was the activity with the gay community of being involved in all these, because I'm a very theatrical kind of person and a musician and stuff. And so I was able to kind of plug in to this wonderful community. I mean, the people who were in this, I mean, the guy who directed our very first show was a television producer for CBS. And we had access to all of the costuming from Bob Mackey. I mean, it was pretty glamorous. So, it was really great. And it was fun. I was 25, 26, so it was very we could stay very active, and it was just tons of people going out, and there was a lot of young people doing
Uh-huh.
things.
Uh-huh.
So that was great. So that's how I got involved in it, and I had several different sponsors, but I finally settled in with this guy who was a gay guy, and he had been with his partner for years, and he was a friend of a friend kind of a thing. And he took me through the steps one by one. I would go over to his house once a week. I had my appointment, and we would read the 12 and 12 aloud, and then we would listen to it at the same time. So it was really good because I needed to have that way of learning. I'd had a couple other sponsors, and I got up to the 4 step, and it just seemed over. It was, I didn't know what to do. I mean, one person would say to do this, one person would say to do that, and the way that he did it was just very. Here's what I want you to do, and then I want you to do this, and then I want you to do that, and I could understand that way.
Uh-huh. What did he want you to do?
Well, it was with the 4 step. I think some people say, "Oh, just write out your whole history," and then one person, whoever you've been upset, but he just gave me a formula. He said, "Write out who you're resentful at," so, and then write out whatever it is, and then how it affected you. It's been a while, and then the third one was what was my part in it,
Uh-huh.
and then I have to think about it. But then there was 2 other categories, and one was like, what can I do to correct this? So with each resentment, I had to go full circle,
Right.
and it made it doable. I was like, oh, okay, so I could just write it out and then go down to the next thing. I didn't write it out like this way. I wrote it out this way. I don't know. It's just a learning thing, I guess. And I was able to get through it. And then he says, okay, now I want you to write out all about, sex. So I took the questions, he just was able to point it out in a specific way that was, like really drilled down, very simple. I don't like to write. I feel like I'm not a good writer, and I have that going on. So then I just kind of go, oh, and so he gave me specific ways to write.
Yeah.
So we went through that, and then all my fears, like, what are you afraid of? Just write down all your fears. And so then we went through the rest of the steps, and then I went through my amends from that, and I walked through that, and
How long did it take you to get through all your amends, your 9-step amends?
um, I didn't have a lot of horrible things. A lot of it was relationship things.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it was just accepting what had happened and not to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it, was just not to. It was just to correct the behavior. And he made me understand the difference of feeling what I was sorry for and what I had actually done. Because I automatically feel bad about something if I had hurt someone's feelings, not necessarily that I had that I had wronged them, but to take care of myself, I had to, it felt hurtful. So I would accept the hurt as more like, oh, I did something wrong. And he would say, no, you just sort of put you just stopped a behavior, and they didn't like it. So you don't have to make amends for something that you feel bad about. You have to make amends for something you did that was wrong. And so that was good. That was a good lesson to learn. And instead of going around saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, it's like, really, what harm did I cause this person?
Mm-hmm.
And not to do it again. So a lot of it was kind of relationship things, and
Did you start getting sponsees at that point, or?
I've had a couple sponsees over the years when I was in LA, and I found that a lot of people I had to learn. Oh, okay. I'm not a taxi driver. I'm not a counselor. I'm not any of these things. And a lot of people wanted those things. So I kind of learned and went, oh, okay. So when people would ask me, I would say, okay, I'm going to tell you what I'm not going to be for you. These are the things I'm not going to be. I'm going to ask you to do this, this, and this. And most of the time, they wouldn't call. It's like, okay, great. But I would tell people, I said, I think it freaks people out to be called a sponsor.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to call me and talk about the steps anytime, I'm willing to do that. And some of that worked for some people.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I have a personality that makes people afraid that I'm going to be this authority figure. And it's like, I don't really care. If you want to talk about the steps, and especially the fourth step, but with this process that my sponsor gave me, it was really easy. It was a lot easier to do. I'm happy to do that. But being a sponsor doesn't seem to be my area of huge service. Because most of the time it hasn't, I can't say I've had, I had, before I moved from Seattle, or moved from LA, I had about 30 people that, we were more in our same social economic kind of a thing, and it was workable for a good while. But, I don't, like in LA, people gathered what they call babies, like, they had 100 babies. I'm like, yeah. Now up here, you wouldn't call them that, the sponsees.
So when did you move to Seattle?
I moved out of Los Angeles in 1991. My job that I had, I just couldn't do it anymore. I'd been sober for 8 years, I think, and I just thought there's got to be more to life than moving packages around from point A to point B. And then, I moved up into management and doing things like that, but I wanted to do music. I wanted to be creative. But I didn't know how to do it. So I just quit my job with the help of, I was seeing a therapist, and she was actually on the program. She goes, okay, let's make a plan. She helped me to make a plan. But then I spent a year doing really nothing. I was living on credit cards. And then I started working in a coffee bar, and I was doing a lot of stuff with AA. We had there's a thing down in Los Angeles called the AA Roundup, which was a gay roundup. It started off in Palm Springs, and then when AIDS came out, they kicked us out of Palm Springs because they didn't want all these queers there giving everybody AIDS.
Mm-hmm.
So it moved into Los Angeles, and so I was a part of that. And we would do these do this big convention in the end of May, around Memorial Day. And I became the I guess it would coordinator, chairman of entertainment. So I had to put on a show. They had these shows that they would put on, and they were they were very elaborate. It took you a whole year to put it together, and it was, dancing, a theme, and this and that, and it put me on the path of what I do for a living. Basically, I was able to be I've been around a lot of great entertainment people. I learned how to ask for lighting people, sound people, and people taught me how to become a producer and a director. And it was fabulous, but I went broke. And then my dad got cancer, and I decided to move up where he and my mom lived, which was up by Yosemite. So I popped up there, and I moved with this woman that I was with at the time. She didn't really have anything going on, so all right, let's go. And so we moved up there, and my dad died within 6 weeks. And so I wound up staying there for 2 years. And the woman I was with was also in the program, but she was quite interesting. I'll just say that because she still lives here. And we moved up here to Seattle because she was from here. And I just had this vision in my mind. I didn't think I would. I had been to Seattle once with her, and I thought, oh God, if I never go there again, I'll be completely happy, because it was January, it was freezing. And I was from Los Angeles. It was like, and I got sick. I got the flu, and so I was freezing. But after 2 years of being out of Los Angeles and being up in the mountains, because we were up in the mountains, I just kept seeing this city with all this water around it, and I literally saw Seattle go across my vision in my brain. I go, I don't know, you want to go to Seattle? And she's like, what? We were gone in 2 weeks. Hook, line, and sinker, and we moved up here. We didn't have jobs. I didn't know anybody. She knew people. She had gotten sober up here, and so we kind of got plugged into that. And it was just not a relationship that was going to last. And we broke up. I thought, well, maybe I'll move back to LA. I didn't know what to do. And then I met another woman who was in the program, but she was in this church that I was in. And so I just sort of fell in that. And that's where I started learning how to doing all these music director jobs and stuff in these New Thought churches, and created my own life up here. And now I'm leaving.
Back to LA?
Well, Southern California, further down. I don't think I could live in LA again.
Well,
So I got here in 93.
yeah. Well, thinking about LA AA and Seattle AA, what are your thoughts about the differences as well?
Well, I started going to meetings. I've always gone to meetings in my whole life. I think it was just during the pandemic that it's like, yeah, not so much anymore. I don't care. The gay meetings up here when I got here, there was plenty, but just had kind of a different vibe to it. I think because I'm in entertainment, and most of the people I was around in Los Angeles, they were all kind of in it, and so we had that kind of vibe. And here it was just kind of, oh, yeah, they were like engineers and work at Boeing, and it was just not. It was just kind of dull, to be honest with you. But I did, they had a gay convention, and I did the show for them a couple of years. I brought one of the pieces that we did, a portion of one of the shows. It was really fabulous. It was really fun. But then I think that conference kind of dwindled, or it died. And then, it just didn't seem like it was for me to do. But I was happy to do. I mean, I did a couple of fundraising things like that for back in the 90s, mid 90s. Yeah, we did some fun little bits. And so, I mean, I had a community. I mean, when I hit 20 years sobriety, I had I had like 4 people that I sponsored. So they were there, and I had a good community. And then I moved into a relationship with a person who is not in the program, and I started able to be kind of around more normalized drinking people, and some not. And I never had a feeling like I was going to drink or anything like that, but it was interesting to be around people who were just kind of normal drinkers. And then there were some who were not. And it's like, okay, well, I need to leave now. I'm just going to go. You guys do your thing. I don't have a judgment of it. I really don't. I just don't find it interesting when it gets to that kind of thing. So I would say that my life kind of changed, and my perspective opened up to a larger community. I have been involved in the New Thought community churches, and I got into that because I was in AA, because of the 11th step, sought through prayer and meditation. And I found a community where it was more of learning about higher principles and different things. And Alcoholics Anonymous, some of the roots of it is based in New Thought philosophy. So it kind of mingles together a lot. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be, you can take a little bit from here and here and here. And that's what I've kind of done. I think if I hadn't been involved in the New Thought community, I kind of would have been lost in that spiritual aspect of it, because I don't think only AA was a good place for me spiritually. Only. Uh-huh. And I find that I think the program is really a solid program, and I don't think it should change. I hate it when people start changing all of the book and that kind of stuff, because it is what it is. I would say the same thing about Mark Twain. It was written at the time. We're adults here. Obviously, if there's racist something in it, maybe you don't want to read that one, but it stands what it is. I believe in the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. I believe in the traditions. I think AA should stay strictly in that lane. It's been so successful. And I'm grateful that all these other ones have come up, but I don't like them when they mingle together. When it's I wound up in this meeting in Southern California by accident, just because it said it was an AA meeting. I went there and they had changed, and it was a church recovery meeting, and people were like, they had to say their name and that they were a sinner. I laughed out loud when they said it. I went, what? This was like, I was 25 years sober, and I thought, oh, okay, I just have to stay here just to see what happens. And then they asked me to share, and I go, I'm not sure you want me to share, but if you really do, I do not consider myself a sinner, and this is not an AA meeting, which I understand, but you still have it in the book as an AA meeting, and that you should figure that out. So I'm very traditionalist of stay the course. It's been very successful. I think it's had such a reach to humanity, and why mess with something that has worked? It's such a simple idea. It's such a simple program, and there's so much room that people can have their own experience of it. If you don't like the God aspect of it, I had friends, they call it Mimi Eisenhower. The Soul Queen said, my higher power is Mimi Eisenhower. Okay, great, whatever. Whatever. It's the spiritual concept. It's the spiritual principle, and it's just more of how I think kind of the universe works, and sort of natural laws of order. But you can't really put that in a recovery book. But they're there if you look for them, and there's room for everyone, and there's room for growth. And that's the thing that I loved about Alcoholics Anonymous, is that they didn't tell me I had to believe in a certain way. So I think the difference for me is more of the personality of it. I think the straight AA here is very solid. I think that the gay AA has been a little up and down. It has its own history, and I'm not really a part of that. Somebody like Liz would probably know more about that, because there was the old yellow house that the people went to. Probably was similar to some of my experiences in LA, and then there was a couple of different centers, and they had one that was in Capitol Hill, and they tore it down at some point. So there was, once that kind of went down there, it kind of dissipated. And so there's just a couple of meetings. Like I know there's a meeting on Monday night that's very active, but it's mostly men. It's a speaker first step meeting. And so...
Well, just since we're talking about gays in AA, just have you ever, in more straight meetings, have you ever felt unwelcomed, or has that ever been an issue?
No, not really. I had one incident in all the years when I was living in the mountains of California. My girlfriend and I went down to Fresno, which is a very redneckish town, for a meeting. It was like, oh, let's go down for a meeting. And we went to this meeting, and I think it was a speaker, couple of speakers or whatever, but they had this guy who was speaking, and he was just a sexist pig. And he was just, he was using all this innuendo and trying to be really funny, and he was just smarmy, and I was probably about 14, 15 years sober, and I didn't know any of these people, but he says, well, let me get to the climax of my talk or something. It was just like he would drop these bombs, and people are like, yeah. And I went, oh, for heaven's sake, or something. I just said something like, shut the fuck up, like out loud. And everybody went, he goes, oh, let's hear from the woman liver back there. I mean, I went, oh, go fuck yourself. And I left, you know. I just thought, I don't need to sit here and listen to this jackass. That was probably the only time where I've ever really, like, spoke up, like, broke up a meeting, because it was like he was just so narcissistic, and it wasn't supposed to be like a 45-minute talk. He was only supposed to talk for like 5 to 10 minutes at the most, and he just kept going on, and it was just smarmy, and I went, shut the fuck up. I thought, I'm not going to sit here, and people were really grateful. But I just said, I'm leaving. So we left, and I didn't go back there. But I mean, most times when I've come out in a meeting where I was especially younger, people were very supportive of it. I've never had.
The era was changing during this time too.
Yeah.
So our time is kind of coming toward the end of the hour. Is there any like burning desires or thoughts that you thought you wanted to talk about that you haven't got to? Because this has been great.
Oh, I'm just blabbing away here. I was trying to look at your notes here of, let me see.
Anything you want to say about service?
Oh, well, I think the thing for me, having, number one is I never turn down an AA request unless it really is an impossible situation where I can't do something. If somebody was to call me and say, I got to be picked up for a meeting, I'd be there. You know, and if somebody said, you know, can you do this? I'm going to do it. Because that's what I learned. The people that I got sober with were hardcore service-oriented people. If you said you're going to do something, you're going to fucking do it. You know, you're going to show up and you're going to have a good attitude about it. Or you're going to, you know, I mean, I have people who would do things that had stolen their girlfriend, and the person who had stolen her girlfriend was wanting to drink and called the old girl, you know, the ex-partner, and said, Mary, I got to get to a meeting. I can't get there. And, you know, and she went over and picked her up, and because it was an AA request, you know, I mean, you know, those are the kind of people that taught me your personality, your desires, your ego is in the way. Go do this thing. And so I find it mortifying when people say they won't do something, like, you know, oh, I couldn't speak. It's like, what do you mean you couldn't speak? You have a story. You don't have to tell, you know, it doesn't have to be clever. Just, it's your story. Tell me what, it will help you, and it will help somebody else, most likely. It's not all about you. So yes, I think service, being in a meeting, being of service. I was kind of getting out of a meeting a long time ago in LA, and I think this woman who I didn't know very well, I wasn't in the in crowd, but she looked over when we were doing the service commitments, and she said, I nominate Bev to be the treasurer. And I'm like, what? What? But it was an AA request, and they all went, yay, it's her. So I had to take the coffee can with all the dollar bills in it for 6 months. We didn't have all this high finance stuff, you know. So it's like, but it kept me coming to the meetings. She knew that. She knew I was kind of on the way out because I was having this argument with my past girlfriend or something. But I had to go to that meeting, no matter what. I had to work through those things. I had to learn. So taking service positions and doing service will help me stay sober, besides the service for the organization. It's simple. It's so stupid. It's so simple. So yeah, I think service is super important for the good of AA and for the good of the community, and yeah, and for the person.
So what do you sort of hope for the future, for AA's future?
Well, I hope that, I mean, COVID has been horrible for for a lot of organizations, I mean, the church that I work in is completely, we're all online. It's like, okay, what's the new version? What we used to know doesn't apply anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing, I think, with AA. I think it's been good. I think we missed the connection about going to a meeting where the physical part of it, because I know when I would go to meetings, when I would be in a space, I knew that's where I was going to feel, I would say, the spirit of whatever is there. There's a complete spirit of the realm of, for lack of a better word, God, that just comes together, and you hear things. It's like, how does that happen? But so it happens within that group. It happens in that thing. I think that it could be missing of that physical kind of those kind of meetings. But it also, with being online, has given people opportunity to go to meetings and be exposed to people that they never would have. That people can go to meetings in Los Angeles, they can go to meetings in Hawaii, without having, and so you can have that. So I think that gives the accessibility to people. But it would be nice to see that once people feel comfortable, that they can come back together to have that also in-person thing. So how that unfolds will be interesting to see. And I think if people stick with the traditions and not water them down and change things because it's politically the better thing to do, like if things start getting a little slip-slidey like that, I think it can muddy the waters. And I think if groups stay strictly to the traditions and show people the difference. There's nothing wrong with having those other things. If somebody wants to have a different kind of a recovery meeting, but don't call it Alcoholics Anonymous. Call it Alcoholics Together, or whatever you want to call it. And we're basing our time together on the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. But this is not an AA meeting. This is an AA meeting because we adhere to the traditions. And having no opinions on outside issues is the big thing that makes it stay there. I mean, I've had to stop people who making announcements about, the rummage sale for the church next week that has nothing to do with Alcoholics Anonymous. It's say, that's a great announcement for after the meeting. But if somebody comes in who's new, they go, oh, it's tied to the church. It's like, no, it's not. It's a separate thing. So keeping together on that, I think will move AA into the new millennium, or into this new wherever we are. But it's a different world. It's a different world, and AA is still very young. I mean, it's only been around, less than 100 years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you think about religions and organizations, how much we've influenced the world in such a short amount of time. But I think the thing that's made it effective is the simpleness of it, and the simple traditions in the simple program, and staying clear on that, having it not be profitable. And everybody has an opinion about how to put everything together. It just drives me crazy. I tried to do, the kind of service work you're doing where you go to the assembly and stuff, like, oh God, no, I can't do that. It's not efficient. It is what it is, and it serves a purpose, but that service work is not for me.
Keeping it simple.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your story with me. I feel lucky.
Oh.
So I'm going to turn off the recording. Unless there's anything further you want to say.
Nope, keep coming back. Work the steps or drop dead, as some of my friends used to say. We used to say things like that to each other.